I'd like to welcome everybody to our weekly webinar. Today, I just want to point out a couple of little facts that might be important for you to consider. Remember, our whole purpose is to try to figure out how to find the best place to practice and how to promote those offices. That's the whole purpose behind this. And I want you to know we're trying to be as fact-based as we can. This isn't a lot of rah-rah. This is the latest research that's coming across our desk, and we're sharing that with you almost in real time. Now today, we're going to be talking about which state might be right for you. Now, before I get into that, remember this. We can actually look at a group of office buildings, a street, a very small geographic area, and to give you a conclusion as to the desirability of that site, or to help you find locations that you hadn't really thought about if you happen to have a region. But it starts with a big area, and then we drill down into a smaller area. Right now, we're going to talk a little bit about how to determine the big area and those criteria to consider. Why is one state going to be right for you, not right for somebody else? And here's the thing. It's not as though there's only one state or one metropolitan area that's going to be great. There are many. But we have to find a place that is going to be right for you, and we're trying to help you in that process of determining that. So let me share my screen as I get into my own little PowerPoint of which state is right for you. Here's the thing that you have to know. Some states suck hose water. Okay, they're terrible. I'm just going to be honest. Some places are doing great, but just because one is great doesn't mean that everybody is going to do as well there. Now, we're confronted with choices all the time, everybody. You all know this. It's not a matter of right and wrong as much as it's a matter of better or worse for you. So you see, you can get into some places that aren't going to be good. And if you did, we'd tell you. And frankly, we do. It's a matter of really trying to find a place that would fit your criteria. The criteria for choice is really what matters, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the facts help. Applications of the facts is really what is most important. Now, let me just explain something. We have a lot of competitors that do data. I mean, they will throw data at you. They'll throw maps. They'll show you where the competition is. But they don't tell you the important things like, how is this going to matter to me? How is this going to help my plan? What is it going to do in the long term? What are the projections for growth and change within an area? That's what we do, and that's what a demographer does. A realtor can tell you about what's available as far as space. They don't tell you about really recommendations on where to go because they don't know enough about the algorithms to make that happen. That is a big thing that separates us. But I want to talk then today about some of these applications of the facts. Now, when somebody says, tell me where to go, Scott, tell me I'll just go anywhere, we always have to say, wait a minute. There's a few things that we have to know about you first. We can't simply throw something at the wall and hope it sticks. And I'll give you an example. We know that from the bell curve, for example, there is a tendency for professionals to marry other professionals. Very often, your spouse has a career. And if your spouse has a career, you have to find work for you as well as for your spouse that will be a good idea over a length of time. So we often have to take into account what your spouse is doing or your significant other. We also recognize that life happens and that sometimes people will get involved in a custody situation. So I only wish that everybody's marriage worked out well, and sometimes it doesn't. And if you happen to have children, particularly teens, you have to recognize that you have to practice in a specific area that is reasonably close so you can see your kids every once in a while. That's why we have to take that into account. There's also supplemental opportunities that come up. Your mom or dad are sick, or they have a practice, or maybe your best friend has offered you an opportunity to come. You can't always choose the best place to have a friend. Your friend will offer an opportunity. So we take those supplemental opportunities into account too. And there's also the fact that there are certain contractual obligations, places that you can't go or shouldn't go based upon contracts or obligations or things that have happened in the past. When this happens, it supersedes the simple choices of saying, just show me where there's growth, no competition, lots of money. That's because life is complicated. But with that in mind, that's when you also can come to us and say, look, I got a 13-year-old girl and her 9-year-old sister, and I want to see them. I still want to be their parent. Where can I go within that area where it's not too far to go? Now, that may not sound like something that's directly relevant to choosing where to go, but it is. Life happens. Now, there are several factors, really there are 4 big factors that I want you to keep in mind, and these are not in a particular order. They are nevertheless important, and I tend to think of them in a natural order. So let me just pull back for a second. I've been reading Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, which is kind of an orientation on life. What's important? What decisions should you make? What should you have as the determining factors of what will make you happy and what will make you sad and how to think about it? Maps of Meaning is an excellent book on that. It's a little bit difficult to get through, I have to admit. And I have a vast vocabulary, but even I need to kind of go, what does that word mean again? So just to let you know, it's tough, but highly recommended, with the idea of guiding your life and figuring out what to do about it. Now, the first question I always ask people is, when they're trying to figure out where to go, is, where are you licensed? Now, it's not as though licensure can't change, or that you could go to a state that looks really good and say, I need to pick up a license in those locations. For the most part, there are a couple of states, however, that are terrible and difficult in order to get a license. Probably the most difficult I know is Hawaii. Hawaii does not want a bunch of people from the mainland coming out and setting up a practice someplace, especially if it means that you're going to compete with, well, a local. They're rather big on locals in Hawaii. It's extremely expensive there, obviously, and we'll talk about the implications of that in a minute. But getting a license there is hard. Another one that I've found is difficult is Delaware. Delaware has been very careful about trying to make sure that the ratio of population to professionals is well within a certain limit. Delaware is not very big. And if you look at the state, there are 3 specific parts from north to south that you have to consider. Knowing that, you have to say, how am I going to fit in which of the 3 parts? But the licensure still is the big issue. Can you get licensed? Now, I well understand that many of the state boards that exist are kind of standardized, and sometimes they'll accept the board results in, the Western regionals or whatever. And for that reason, an optometrist or a dentist or a physician may be able to be licensed in several places, and you consider which is the best option for me. Now, that's one of the questions that I'm going to ask. Where are you licensed? What boards have you taken? What is the desire that you have for that? Because sometimes it's just a matter of saying, where's the reasonable place that you're already licensed? But I don't want you to be limited to that, because there are some places in the United States that are really good that you may not have a license in. Nothing wrong with that, but it's an issue. Now, another thing to keep in mind is the cost of living. And most of the time these days, when we talk about the cost of living, we're really talking about the cost of housing. Now, I bring that up because if you want to know about where to buy food inexpensively, Idaho and Wyoming are very inexpensive places to buy food. Florida's pretty inexpensive as well. However, there are some states that's more expensive, but I mean, food is not that much to begin with, even from the highest to the lowest. Houses, on the other hand, are extremely different. So when I say you've got to keep in mind the cost of living, how expensive is it to go there? There's an odd phenomenon we've noticed in some states. And I'll give you an example in California. It's extremely difficult in the Bay Area, in Northern California, trying to find staff who can live reasonably close to the office. because you have to pay them a lot of money, especially if they have to drive an hour and a half to get to the office. And if you have to drive an hour and a half to find a place to live, that's tough. Now, the places within each state are a little different. There are, especially the large states, New York, California, Chicago, Illinois, Florida, and Texas as well. There are some places that are much more affordable to go in. And frankly, if you had a house in those particular areas, you wouldn't know that that state was really, really expensive. And an example that I give of that, in California, the longest commute is actually in Riverside, California. That represents the state's longest commute. It's the longest commute because that's the most affordable place in which people can live. Yeah, Riverside County. So you'll often have a commute of an hour and a half. That's crazy high, but nevertheless, it explains with the cost of living why people are doing that, because if you ever want to have a house, spend a weekend with the kids, have a backyard, it's kind of expensive, a little pricey. So we want to take into account the cost of housing, especially, to determine the cost of living. And that will be an important issue. Now, by the way, you probably also know that the places with the lowest cost of living, like Mississippi and even Louisiana, parts of Georgia, those are not necessarily the places everybody's fighting to get in, but the cost of living is so reasonable. So you can have a Taj Mahal home, but you have to remember some of your neighbors will not be particularly affluent. And that seems to go with cost of living. Now, the third issue I want to bring up is the cost of doing business. And there are three categories that I've listed on your screen. The first one is taxes. Now, when people say, I can't live here, I've got to leave, and I ask them why, and it often has to do with the cost of doing business. It is so expensive. Now, taxes is a very broad category. It used to be property taxes is what people worried about, but local sales taxes can also be pretty unreasonably high. And in some states, the income tax, personal income tax, can be ridiculously high. Now, the federal government changed what is deductible, and that's the state and local, or the SALT tax, has made it very tough because you can't write those off like you used to. So people are saying, why is everybody leaving Illinois? Why is everybody leaving New York State? Well, the taxes aren't deductible. And so now, right now, when everybody's done their taxes, they're realizing, sweetheart, we're starving to death. Let's get out of here. Now, in New York, by the way, there's an obvious conduit. People are heading to Florida. You'd think, well, they could go a lot of places. No, they're going to Florida. And why? Because the taxes are low. The state income tax is non-existent. Same thing with Nevada. So a lot of people are heading to Nevada, northern Nevada, southern Nevada, because of the taxes. Cost of doing business, in other words. Now, there's also another factor, and that's how much you have to pay your staff. If you have to pay your staff by mandate $15 an hour, as is happening in several states, guys, I got to tell you, that is taking a big chunk out of what people are paying. In a lot of the United States, minimum wage is $7.78. In some places, they have bumped it almost to $15 an hour. Very often, like in New York State, if you work for a large company, you will get that $15 an hour, but if you're working for a small company, it'll be about $11 an hour. But here's the problem. If you're in a bordering state like New Jersey, well, hey, look, New Jersey has a very small, about $8.50 minimum wage. And therefore, they're right next to each other. People are saying, why should I be staying here where I have to pay my staff so much more? And it's being mandated not because of the demand for the minimum wage. It's done because somebody thinks it's a good idea that we all have a living wage. So it's affecting where people are willing to go. And Washington State really is responsible for the growth that's going on in Idaho. Now, the third part of that cost of doing business is actually lease rates. In some places, the amounts people are charging for leases is going way up. If you didn't watch our episode earlier on the way that cities are being organized and changed to create one-way streets, it's kind of amazing because they're it's really boosting tax rates and parking rates. And so people are kind of going, my gosh, I'm going to starve to death. And it's often because of the cost of the facility you're in. Now, you also know, I'm sure, that the location that you're in is going to determine to a large degree how successful you are. Yeah, you'd almost think that I was a demographer or something, you know, telling you that. But I digress. So when we talk about the cost of doing business, these are the three big categories, but there are several others to keep in mind. You also want to know that there's a fourth factor that I kind of take into account, and that is growth and opportunity. There are some places that are growing really quickly, and everybody is going there because taxes are low, cost of living is low. It's a reasonable place to start up a practice from scratch, and that place is all yours. It's not always possible to buy into every area because in a lot of places, the growth and opportunity is low because for a professional, because there are no practices on the market. In those locations, I so strongly recommend you talk to brokers because they're going to be your best conduit of finding those. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is to help you figure out where the growth and opportunity are going to be. But I like Atlanta. A lot of people don't because they feel uncomfortable with greater Atlanta. Some people are kind of put off by Nebraska. Well, guys, I hate to tell you, some of these locations that have growth and opportunity are doing spectacularly well. You can't base where you're going simply upon the idea of saying, yeah, this is where everybody wants to go. Now look, Alaska is a wonderful place, all right? Not hard to get licensed. However, the weather is brutal, and a lot of people realize I'm on an island. Oh no, it's not really an island, but it may as well be an island. And when you can only get someplace like Anchorage by flying or by boat, yeah, you realize you're a little isolated. So what works for some won't work for others. Now, there's some generalized factors I want to take into account just briefly. Then I'm going to turn some time over to Mike. Look, everybody tells me, well, can you tell me what the compensation rates are? A particular insurance rate, plan. What do they compensate? There's a little bit of a fallacy in this. Compensation rates will vary state by state, but they will also vary because compensation rates need to be higher when the cost of doing business in that state is higher. They keep the compensation rate somehow matched with how much it costs to practice there. Trust me, the insurance companies don't want to put their clients out of business. So you can't just say, well, show me the place with the big money, because compensation rates are just not made that way. Another thing is people say, I just want to go where there's great climate and weather. Yeah, look, you guys are professionals. You're doctors. You don't work outside. So trust me, it's great if you can go skiing or surfing, but there are a lot of other factors that may be a little more important than the climate and the weather. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm just saying not as important. Hobbies and interests are the same thing. Don't assume that there's a hobby and an interest nirvana. You kind of have to say, yeah, we're going to have to do a little bit of compensation to ourselves. We're going to have to take a few things in check. And the same thing's true of lifestyles. Now, I say lifestyles, that's a euphemism, by the way, for psychographics. Yes, it is great if you have people who are all wealthy, but wealth or lifestyle is not necessarily a thing by itself. So what I'm just saying is these may be important, but you have to take these into account, a little bit of a grain of salt. Now, trending locations are something we look at all the time. There are three: Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Salt Lake City. Right now are doing great, not just because of growth, but because of desirability for young professionals with money. Pittsburgh is especially a surprise. Nobody was expecting that old Rust Belt city to do well. Baltimore has actually had a net loss in population, and some wise investors have come in, bought the land of facilities, and built it up. Salt Lake City is not the place in itself. You have to consider an area from Provo on the south all the way up to Ogden on the north. And that is what people consider the Salt Lake metro area. Get a house on the bench, life is good. I'm just saying, guys, these are the trending locations. We look at them often. The best way to figure out which locations are trending in your area is to do a telephone consult. get on the phone with Mike and I, and we can actually talk to you about what places might look hot within the areas that you're interested in. I want to advise you, though, keep sending friends over to the perfect place to put a practice, but get online with us, do the telephone consultation. I can't think of a better way to do this than to talk to Mike and I about what looks good in your particular area. Mike, are you ready?
I can't think of anything better than that either. Quite honestly, I really can't. I am ready, Scott.
All right, take it away, bud.
Well, it's important, I think, in the few minutes that I've got here to share some really important information for you business owners, practice owners, clinicians that are trying to be a true business owner, to know how to look at data in a way that's going to be meaningful. And Scott and I deal with this all the time when we're talking with doctors, when we're helping them move from one area to the other, or to evaluate an area in, is it going to match them? And I think that, Scott just kind of shared a couple cities there. As I look at some of the clients that I've worked with recently, and I think of, what could possibly be good for them, you really have to start looking at things in a quantitative and a qualitative way. It's really the only way that you can do both sides of the research and understand not only the data, but what the data means. And this really is key when you start considering the very important decision of your practice placement, or maybe on a micro level, whatever campaign that you're going to run or the patients you're going to target. It's important to understand these two things. So just by definition, real quickly, just to make sure everybody is on the same page and knows what we're talking about. When we're talking about quantitative research, we're really talking about the numbers. We're talking about those cold, hard facts. We're talking about statistics. We're talking about the big data numbers that we're going to look at. As an example, maybe you might say, we have 100,000 people that live in this area, and 2,500 of them are my patients, so thus I own 2.5% of the market share. That would be an example of a quantitative approach to doing research in your area to try to understand how much market share you have. Whereas the qualitative side, frankly, is a little bit more complex, but as a marketer, so much, I wouldn't say more important, but really tells the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, tells the rest of the story of why those numbers might be important for you as a practice owner, and certainly for me as a marketer. So an example of qualitative research would be to understand the why behind the number, to really understand the demographics, and especially the psychographics, like Scott was just talking about, and the part they play in the quantitative numbers. So if we're looking at, as an example, maybe you put out a campaign and you get 50 phone calls from that campaign, a marketing campaign that you put out. You might look at that and say, oh, 50, that's just the number, that is the success or the failure. Whereas the qualitative side might ask a few probing questions behind those people. Where did you see the advertisement? What time of the day did you call? Are you a male or a female? Are you a rich person or a poor person? That is going to be the kind of qualitative questions that you're going to ask yourself in order to understand the numbers. So let me give you another example, and this is kind of a really good illustrative way that you can look at it. And for those of you that can see my screen, you can see this little comic strip that I really liked. A quantitative way would be, say, this little gentleman here is giving away free ice cream. The quantitative way to say, wow, there's only 30 people that took the free ice cream, that's interesting. Whereas the qualitative way might be a person asking, what did you feel when you saw the free ice cream sign? And the person might respond excited or maybe even a little scared. And the person gathering the data would say, why was that? That is really the key to understanding the importance behind those numbers. Why did those 50 people respond to your campaign? What was it in your campaign? What was the tagline? What was the motivator? What was the words or the offer that motivated that person to pick up the phone? That's the qualitative research. Now, as we're doing research, I think it's very, very important for us to understand this quote by Albert Einstein, which I think kind of sums it up super well. He says that everything that can be counted does not necessarily count, and everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted. It's really important when you're looking at your total marketing campaign that you understand what numbers are really important. One thing that I see a lot of practices doing is they're gathering a lot of junk data. They're gathering data that doesn't mean anything, that doesn't indicate anything, doesn't tell a story. And while it's great that they're gathering the number, it's just not significant in making decisions. And in my opinion, again, as a marketer, data is there to help you make a decision, to set the course better for whatever campaign you're going to go. So let me give you in a few minutes just a little example of something that probably almost all of you will be able to do today if you log into. Now, I really hope that all of you have Google Analytics installed on your website. Now, a website is a really good classic example of both quantitative and qualitative data research, and gives you presents you with the data so that you can actually make an actionable decision on it based on it. Now, if you don't have Google Analytics, then this isn't going to make any sense. And if you don't, what the heck are you doing? Because it's free, just a line of code. You've got to have it on your website. So let me give you an example. Say, and this is an actual site that I manage for a client. This particular client has, in the last 30 days, has had about 16,000 visitors or clicks to their website. Now, unfortunately, that's a quantitative number, and is the number that I would say that the majority of business owners, that's the only number they look at of, oh, well, how many clicks am I getting to my website? How many visitors am I getting to the website? And my answer to them is it doesn't matter how many clicks you're getting to your website. Let me ask you this. Would you rather get 100 people to walk through your door, through the door of your practice to see what you're about, or would you rather have 10 people walk through your door that are actually going to end up in the chair? I think all of you would say you want the 10 that are going to actually end up in your chair. And so that's the 10 that you should be looking at and understanding and asking some qualitative questions behind understanding who they actually are, why they're making those decisions. So let's look at another Google Analytics screen that kind of helps demonstrate this. Well, actually, before we leave, let me just point out this particular screen also shows us how long they're on the website, what their bounce rate is, how many pages deep did they go onto the website. So it starts to hint to some qualitative data that we can start reading into and making some good decisions on. Now, as we click on the age and gender demographics, this becomes very interesting for us as we're looking at this particular client. We can see very, very clearly that those younger adults, 25 to 34, are the ones that are most interested in this particular client's website. Not only that, we see that the split is pretty clear between male and female, so there's not a clear winner there on who they're going to be targeting. So if I'm a marketer, I know that my marketing has to be pretty gender neutral, but it does need to lend towards the mid to late 20s to the early 30s when I'm looking at putting together my campaign. Another quick example. And this is, again, in Google Analytics, you can take this to the next level. You have all these different demographic features that we can then tie to what these people are into, what kind of lifestyles, what kind of hobbies. Are they spending their time on banking and financial websites? Are they into sports and fitness? Are they into the arts? What are they into? And then we start to understand something that you hear from Scott and I all the time, and that is the true psychographics of who these people are, what's going to motivate them, and what's going to bring them to a buying decision. That is the key. And I always tell people when they get our reports that the psychographic section is probably the most neglected by the reader, but in our view, probably the most important, key, valuable piece of data that you're going to get through the research that we do, because it tells not only the quantitative that you got through the demographics and the numbers that we share, but also the qualitative information to help you make really good marketing decisions. Now, just to end up here, we are looking for a few doctors that want to be part of the elite. We want you to go through our dental marketing mastery course. If this is something that you want to really take the marketing by the horns in your particular practice, this is the course for you. What you need to do is reach out to me at mike@drdemographics.com, or you can give me a call directly. My number is right there on the screen. And let me know that you want to be starting. We have a couple of seats left starting August 1st. So if you want to be part of our August group, we're only going to take 5 doctors, 5 practices. Please let me know sooner than later so we can get your seat reserved. Scott, you're a brilliant man. Any other thoughts on qualitative and quantitative research and the role it plays for doctors?
Well, first of all, Mike, I think you did a very good job of explaining the difference in the application to the doctor's work.
Thank you.
Let me just give you one other example. There are lots of people who will tell you how many competing practices there are or how many doctors there are within a geographic region, 5-minute, 10-minute, in a zip code, whatever. That is good information, good quantitative information, but it's not very good quantitative.
Right.
If everybody is doing one particular thing and you're the only one doing something different, that's a big advantage to you. If, on the other hand, you've got reasonable numbers of competition, but everybody's doing just the same thing in the same way, you're hosed. And that's where the application of quantitative and qualitative data comes in. I'm also going to just be blunt. Most of our competitors don't know anything about qualitative data. They only know about the simple numbers because they're getting them from databases. I'm not trying to say they don't love their dog and they hit their wives. I'm just saying that's why you're not getting enough information to make really insightful decisions. You need both qualitative and quantitative data. Mike, I think this is a very important episode. I'm gonna throw out this. I'm going to recommend those people who are watching or hear this, use the discount code MiracleMax49. Guys, we don't offer this just to everybody all the time, and when we see a group, we'll turn it on, this discount. I want you to help back us up and say these discounts are being helpful. MiracleMax49 is about the deepest discount we're offering right now. So please think about doing it. It's only going to be up for maybe a week or 2. But if you're interested in getting a report, any of our reports, you can use MiracleMax49. Mike, you're cleared to activate that on our website. Go.
Okay, thank you. Just for clarity, so we don't get any hate mail, it's hit the dog and not love your wife, not love your dog and hit your wife.
Is that right? Are you sure?
I don't want to. Maybe not. I don't know.
All right, Mike. I'll take your word for it.
Okay, good.
Everybody, thanks so much for watching. We'll be back next week, and take care.